Welcome to our Stearns Financial live chat. Today we are going to delve into what makes a great transition from one chapter of life to the other. Some folks who are signing into this are thinking about preparing for perhaps retirement, but there's others who have rewired themselves multiple times and are just simply thinking about a new chapter in their life. I am joined today by two wonderful folks who have a lot of knowledge and experience in this space. Abby Donnelly is the founder of the Leadership and Legacy Institute. The bio was sent out in advance. Abby has a tremendous bio in this space and has been working with a lot of folks we know in this, how do I have a successful transition? And so we are delighted to have her. And many of you know Gary Brott, Dr. Brott, and he is back to share. He's actually been doing a lot of the rewiring, both in the pandemic. Many of you probably read his article about different transitions he was going through in the pandemic and his worldwide speaking gigs on change and happiness and how he has kind of transitioned to Wilmington, North Carolina, but not retired, just simply rewired. So in this topic, folks, Abby, let's start with you. I mean, what are some of the keys that you see to a successful transition?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that are important, and I kind of think about them in two phases. So phase one is wrapping up the past. And I think for business owners, that's critically important, but it's important for anybody that's going to be changing roles later in their career. Although I might argue it's critical for anybody changing roles. But the idea is that, you've got to take a look at what have I done to date and figuring out how do I close it out in a way that's meaningful to me. And so everybody might have their own ways that they want to get closure on that part of their career or that part of their business. But you got to spend some time figuring out what that is. And then the next phase, of course, is where are you going to? And so it's planning well for your future and identifying what are those characteristics that will make a meaningful, value-added, relevant, and joyful life as you move into that next phase.
Well, and I know we have a few folks in the audience who are transitioning from a business, but the transition may take years. So they sort of feel like they have one foot in two canoes and they're trying to move forward while they're still trying to I guess, wrap up some of those things you talked about. I mean, what are the special challenges with that?
Well, I think, the wrapping up is about making sure that you've got the people in positions and able to do their jobs the way that you want them to. I think most business owners, we tend to think that most business owners want to exit their business and make the most money that they can. But the reality is that money is a factor, as you well know, Dennis, but it is not the only factor. And in many cases, it's not even the most important factor. So the wrapping up has a lot to do with, how do you make sure that the culture that you've built over the course of your business is going to stay intact? How do you make sure that the people are developed and prepared to take on the new responsibilities that you want them to take on? And how do you have confidence that you're leaving the business in good hands, whether you're leaving it to those key employees and family members, or whether you're selling it to a third party? Just got to make sure that it's going, you've got the confidence that it's going to be taken care of the way that you wanted it to be taken care of.
Sure. Well, and we have a number of folks, including some on this call, that are doing partnerships with private equity entities. And so they still own equity in their company. They're still going to be there for some period of years, but they're kind of shifting and changing. So Gary, as a rewire guy, talk about some of the keys to successful transitions that you've seen, successful change, dealing with change.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Abby. rewirement is a concept that my wife Peggy and I came up with. We're not the first ones to come up with it, but it popped into our heads when we first started talking about moving down here to Wilmington. And Peggy was saying, yeah, but I don't want to retire. And she was doing a lot of work there in Greensboro, and I was hopping on planes. So we decided, well, let's not retire in our family. We're going to rewire. So let me define rewirement. Rewirement means you do more of what's inspired and less of what's required. And in order to be inspired by something, you have to have something that you're excited about running to, not just walking away from what you have been doing. So for me, the transition planning, whether I'm a business owner, a senior executive, or even just a line worker who's kind of coming to the near the end of my quote unquote working life, to prepare for rewirement, you almost can't start too soon, because you have to start thinking about what are some of those things that are going to inspire me, that are going to make me excited, and start thinking about those and planning for those sometimes years before the time comes. Because me personally, I didn't get a chance to do that transition. And I've coached people to do it for years, and I've been kind of thinking about it, but I got a financial plan. My plan called for me to work for about another 4 or 5 years. Pandemic hit, boom. There goes my business, hopping on airplanes, giving talks and consulting. And it was a tough transition. It was not an easy transition for me to go through. And in some ways, I'm still going through it. But, Abby, I want to get your advice on the best ways to handle that for a character like me.
Well, I think one of the challenges that you faced is that it was an unexpected transition for you. And the point that you're making, which I think is such an important point, is that if we know that this is going to be a transition in the future, it behooves us to start planning for it now. And it doesn't mean that we have to move into that. One of the conversations I have with owners all the time is, if I start doing this work, if I start figuring out what I want to do next, doesn't that mean I have to move there quickly? And the beauty of being a business owner is we business owners get to decide the timeline of when they want to exit their business. And, in most cases, that timeline can be dependent on when they're ready to exit their business and when they're ready to take on a new role. And I think that's the key. We tend to think about this as a defined line in the sand that says, I'm either the owner of the company or I'm not. And there's only 2 ways to go about it. But in reality, there are many different roles that the owner can choose to fill, whether by design through a private equity acquisition or by their own design, that can be of great value to the company and allow the new owners to take over and lead the business towards that new strategic direction. And so, your situation was very different, where you were just sort of your business dropped out immediately. And so you got to figure out, what do I love to do? My 3 things when I'm working with a client on figuring out that next chapter is, what are you passionate about? Which is, what do you love to do? What are your favorite strengths to use? Because we're at a point in our careers when we're exploring this, where we've earned the right to choose which strengths we want to use versus having to use strengths because it's the only way to get results. And so, which are your favorite strengths to use? And then what are the lifestyle priorities? And you had already gone pretty far down that path with figuring out that you and your wife wanted to move to Wilmington and, some of those other factors. But those are the 3 things that I think can combine together to create a really relevant and value-added next chapter.
Yeah, those are interesting points, Abby, because it was sudden, bam, it hit me. And I thought about going over to virtual speaking, and I've done some of that. But what I had to really do is figure out 2 things. One is what's my passion, and I kind of explored that question, and it's helping people. So that's where I was frustrated. But I can't help people if I'm not hopping on planes and giving talks and coaching and stuff. But then, like one day, Peggy and I were taking a walk in the neighborhood, and we run across this neighbor. We've seen her, said hi since we've lived here, and we start chatting with her, and it turns out her husband's in early stage, or actually probably mid-stage Alzheimer's. And we didn't know that. We knew that something, he was always quiet and stuff like that. But the next thing you know, I go, oh, well, I know, I can kind of help you some with that. I know some people that, because she was at her wit's end. She goes, I don't have, Peggy had just met somebody who does home health care really well. I, of course, knew some people through Dennis. Scott Silk Knitter, who knows all about that stuff. And I go, oh, here's another way to help people. It's pretty cool. She sent Peggy an email. That was probably about 6 months ago. She sent Peggy an email and she goes, I look back on that day I ran into you and Gary as like a changing point in my life, because I was at my wit's end. And now, my husband's doing better than he was and all this other kind of stuff. So I go, oh, that's what rewirement is. Rewirement is figuring out what your passion is, but then broadening your base of how you do it. I don't have to be talking to an audience. I don't have to be coaching an executive. I can be talking to my neighbor, or another thing I did is volunteer with the local middle school. Teachers are all stressed out. So it's finding in rewirement. The reason we use the term rewirement is that, if you're going to be rewiring your house, it's not like you rip out all the old wires and now you're in the dark. No. We're going to put in a new way to bring power and light to our home, a more efficient way, a modern way. That's what rewirement is. It's not like, oh, well, now that I've sold my business, now that I've left, whatever I was doing for the last 30 years, it's not like my life is over. No. We just got a new phase that's starting. And it's a phase that you're starting where you can figure out what are those passions and how can you meet those in a new and different way.
And I think that's the key is, how can you meet them in a new and different way? So sometimes, we get kind of hooked on the specific thing. Like you said, well, gosh, for years and years, I've been getting on planes and speaking and consulting. And how can I help people if I can't do that? But what you recognized is that at the core, it's not just about helping people. You actually, I think, went a few levels deeper and you said, how is it that I like to help people? Well, I like to be able to offer resources and provide support for people that are going through difficult times. And that's what you were doing when you were consulting. And that's what you were doing when you were speaking, is you were providing some of that kind of support and some of those connections to resources that they needed to know. And so when you ran into your neighbor and you were able to apply those same strengths and passions, the neighbor got great value out of it, and it was rewarding to you. I could hear it in your voice and see it in your body language that really, it meant something to you.
Yeah, and here's another big challenge I had. And Dennis, I'd like to get your kind of thoughts on this too, with the clients that you work with, and Abby, obviously you. One of the hardest parts for me in the transition, and by the way, I decided I'm retired from looking for work, but if work happens to find me that I want to do, that's just fine. I've had a couple of clients call, hey, will you coach me? Okay, yeah, I'll do some coaching. I've done some virtual talks, that kind of thing. But the hardest part for me, emotionally, psychologically, and I bet for a lot of people listening today, is I had to learn how to give myself permission not to work the way I've worked the last 30 years. Peggy and I started our business when I was in my late 30s. I was real naive about money back then. I had $10,000 in my retirement plan and 2 little kids and a mortgage. And I realized, well, now working for ourselves, there's not going to be a retirement plan beyond that unless we do something. So that's what I've been doing since my late 30s. And I've enjoyed it. It's great. But then when it's suddenly like, well, you don't, and then, we check our numbers. Oh, well, I don't really have to work like that. So I was fortunate that way, which I didn't know, but having a financial plan helped me figure that out. But man, that psychological thing of I'm just relaxing. I'm just enjoying myself. It's a beautiful day. I think I'll go for a walk. It took me a good 3-4 months to get to where I didn't feel bad about that.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I remember a very specific conversation with a client many years ago who had told me that, he was working 60 hours a week, and he anticipated he'd continue to work 60 hours a week until, 3 to 4 years down the road, when he got the new president in place and some of the other key roles at the level where they could be running the company more. And he was describing to me how he was spending that 60 hours a week. And I remember looking at him and saying to myself, that sounds like you're operating as though you were a 30-year-old that was still learning the business and learning how to do these things. And my sense is that you probably have a lot more wisdom and experience, that all this preparation that you're doing in advance may not be necessary, or maybe not in the exact same way. And if you were to adjust how you're doing some of the work, you would find that it wouldn't take 60 hours a week anymore. It might take 40, it might take 30, I don't know, but it wouldn't take 60. And your level of intensity and hours that you were spending would decrease. And I remember he looked at me and said, well, but I'm a grind it out kind of guy. And I said, yeah, You are today because that's the pattern that you've built. But is it possible that you don't have to be a grinded out kind of guy anymore? And so I gave him some homework assignments to really pay attention to how was he doing what he was doing, and was it really necessary? And to take some sort of safe but intentional risks about not over preparing the way that he had historically done. But do it when it's a safe place. Don't do it in the most important meetings that you're going to be having over the next couple of months, but do it in the meetings that may not be as consequential. And when we met again and debriefed about it, he said it was amazing. I realized that all the preparation that I was doing was really to satisfy myself, that I was still the leader and was modeling it for my team. And I hadn't really given myself credit for all of the wisdom and experience that I had gained. And I was actually able to be more effective by spending less time in the, grinded out, grueling preparation mode, and be more present and be able to respond. And we ended up getting better outcomes. And so that was an exciting moment for both of us, because he could see a picture of how he could work differently in this next phase of, he wasn't ready to move out of the business, but it was in that 3 to 4 year window that you were talking about, Gary.
So I have a text here from one of our audience members who's a partner in a CPA firm, and she says, I don't have to work 60 hours a week. Okay, so let me jump in here, because I think there's a couple of really key points that are being made. And one of them is that we have seen time and again over the years, people get to some level of expertise or mastery of their career, profession, business, whatever it is, and they feel like, hey, I just got here. I want to stay here for a while. And staying there for a while and relaxing in the enjoyment of that expertise or mastery is a wonderful thing. But then we've seen a lot of people overstay their welcome. And so that kind of gets back. And I will say that we have seen this more in men than women, that for whatever reason, men sometimes have difficulty thinking about that next chapter. Oh, I'm starting over again, figuring out how to do, whatever it is. Retirement could be it. And I don't want to be a beginner again. I don't want to be a novice. And so they're really comfortable being where they are. And, in some cases that's fine. In some cases it's destabilized the family unit because they're, still working 40 hours a week when they're 80 years old. The paradox of that, though, and we reported this out in the research in the Fourth Quarter Fumbles book, is that the more you stay engaged at a higher level, and I don't mean playing crossword puzzles or mahjong, the more you stay engaged at a higher level, the studies show that you stay more relevant. Maybe it fends off dementia, Alzheimer's. They're still doing a lot of research on that. And the rewiring of the brain. We cite the Mankato nun story in the book about the nuns, who are 80 years old, who are learning all kinds of new things. And one of them, they opened up her brain after she died, and they found that the brain had rewired, that synapses had forced its way through the plaque of Alzheimer's. Remarkable. Now, they were doing remarkable learning things that most folks we know in their 70s and 80s aren't particularly interested in doing, like learning Mandarin Chinese. Yeah. So, but again, I think the important point here is kind of being aware when your own background, training, whatever, is causing you to fall into a rut. And Abby, you helped that individual sort of put up a mirror and say, okay, why am I still running the 26-mile marathon when maybe I don't need to?
Well, and, one of the reframes that I would offer, when we hear the words overstaying our welcome, it feels like we're trying to push out the owner. And I think that tends to appropriately so raise the shackles of people that are in those ownership and leadership roles, because nobody wants to be seen as the person that overstayed their welcome. And I know what you're getting at, Dennis, is, that point in time at which the business needs a different kind of leader, or the dynamics are such that the role that the leader is playing in that business is creating some unevenness or some tension, or in some cases, truly some detriment. And so the way that I like to reframe it is that it's a process, instead of overstaying welcome, of really redefining the role that that leader has, maybe in the company, maybe in life. Because what I've seen in a lot of cases is that if we talk about overstaying welcome, then heels get dug in really deeply, and then it's just about resistance. And that's really not healthy for anybody. It's not healthy for the leader. It's not healthy for the company or the family or other employees that are there. But if we talk about it in terms of redefining the role, then it becomes more about how can that owner add value, stay relevant, and define their work in a way that brings significant value to the company, significant value to the leaders that are in that business. And if they're selling it to a private equity firm, bring that value there as well. And that gives a little bit of space. It doesn't always happen like this, but if that's important to the owner, then it gives them some space to then be able to see new ways that they can add value, that open up the potential for a next chapter that's actually even more rewarding than anything they could have imagined.
Well, and it's defining that what is more rewarding piece that I see a lot of people struggle with. And so we won't mention the name of this individual, but Abby and I have worked with a very successful individual who, when he was looking at retiring, had, I don't even know how many potential offers, dozens, including some that would like reshape an entire country in what it could do. I mean, they were remarkable. And he had to sort through what's really important to me, and again, this is where you have, I've trained all my life to be ready for this challenge to climb Mount Everest, and he chose to not climb Mount Everest. Now he's doing some amazing things in a bunch of areas, but to actually be able to choose that, I just think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and from the psychological perspective that I come at things with, it's that whole thing around who am I? Abby, you started talking about, redefining my role in the business. It's also redefining my role in my life.
Your identity.
Because if I have been, for the last 30 years, who are you? Oh, I am a business owner. I am a senior executive in a major company. I'm this or that. And now I'm not. We just lost General Colin Powell, who I think was a great man. And out of all my years speaking, people would always ask me, Gary, do you get nervous? And I said, I only got really nervous one time. It was my honor to have to follow Colin Powell to the stage. That day, I was quite nervous. I'm like, what the heck am I going to say after Colin Powell? But I still remember what he talked about. And he talked about this. He talked about how he would get on the airplane and everybody's saluting. And he would take his Diet Coke, and he said, when I set my Diet Coke down on the table, that was the signal to the attendant to let the pilot know we were ready to go. And he goes, that was my life. And he goes, I retired. And literally the day after I retired, I found myself underneath the kitchen sink trying to fix this leaky pipe. And, and I'm going, what happened? And it's that, because, well, who am I? And then his wife, he said, when I took over the State Department too, he said, my first day at the State Department, my wife said to me, Colin, you're not a general anymore. You're no longer in the military. You're in the civilian world. So don't go out there and be a general. He says, all right, honey, I got it. And then he said, I got up there, and on the first day as the head of the State Department, you give a talk. He said, the first words out of my mouth was, good morning, troops. And he goes, so learning and planning, who am I besides just a business person, just a business owner, because that's such a strong part of my identity. If I don't figure out that what that identity is in the next phase, that's when I tend to hang around the business perhaps and be meddling and muddling when, I shouldn't be, because I don't know what else to do with myself.
That's right. And you're making 2 points. It's not only what else to do with myself, but the other point that you're making is that I need to know how to describe who I am to other people. And I need to describe who I am to myself. And so, part of the process that I love going through with clients is helping them discover what that new identity is. And there's a part of the process that I think is so critical. It's almost a pivot point where they've got to write their new story, because the story of who they are is no longer fitting for the person they are going to become in the future. And even if they're going to continue to work in the business, maybe they've got an earnout, or maybe they're going to stick around in a different, newly defined role or something like that. And that's going to work out well for everybody. They're still in a different role. And it's hard to talk about who we are when we haven't really solidified what who we are in this next chapter of our life. So the process of creating that narrative is extremely important, and it can be extremely powerful. I always cringe when I see people that are retired, and for the first 6 to 12 months, it's if they haven't re-identified, then they introduce themselves as, I used to be the owner of, or I used to be the CEO of. And it's not that that's not a very relevant and important part of their experience. And so it may have a role in their introduction of self, but it's even more self-empowering and more powerful when they're able to talk about the relevant, and you used that word earlier, that Dennis, I think that's a really key word, the relevant and value-added contributions that they're making in this next chapter, or are looking forward to making, because of all the experience and all the successes that they've had in the past in their career.
Well, and that's that. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary.
I was going to say that narrative, that's a part of the process. Because see, I'm like our guinea pig here, because I'm still kind of in this process, but so I'm not speaking anymore. So people go, so Gary, are you retired? And Abby, I didn't know how to answer that. I'm like, well, no, I'm not retired, but I'm not really doing anything. So maybe I am retired. And here's something else, folks, that I want you to know. It'll be a struggle at times, and that's okay. I had some rather rough days where I'm like, what am I doing and who am I, or whatever. But Abby, to your point, what really helped me is I came up by going through the struggle and really asking myself these questions. I finally came up with, oh yeah, that's my narrative. That's what I said earlier. Yeah, I'm retired from looking for work, which means I'm not out there grinding. I'm not out there spending money on marketing. I'm not out there trying to do a whole bunch of stuff on LinkedIn. So I'm retired from that. Hey, but if work happens to find me that I want to do, so I found this really, really cool couple down in Mexico that are doing amazing work. And I kind of reached out to that guy, so I'm coaching him, kind of on a pro bono basis. I love it. I got a couple of other people who across the globe come to me and say, hey, would you help me with this? Oh yeah, I like working with you. Sure, I'll work with you. But I'm not looking for that stuff. If it finds me and I want to do it, I do it. And again, I'm fortunate where I'm in that position where I don't have to take stuff. But coming up with that narrative was important for me that I could share with other people. No, I'm not retired. I'm just retired from looking for work. And if it finds me, great.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to rewire this conversation just slightly, or redirect it. We do have a question, and thank you, Karen, for putting the question in the Q&A section. Anybody else who has questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A section of this Zoomcast. And so her question is, some of us are transitioning from already being retired in our own homes to moving to a continuing care retirement community. Can you include some content on making a successful transition in that situation? So that's yet another fairly significant milestone for some people.
But Dennis, I can begin to address that one because I got some fresh data on that. My dad lives in a really nice continuing care facility down in Sarasota. And 2 years ago, they asked me to come down and give a talk on sort of how to increase happiness and well-being in the fourth quarter of life. And just recently, they asked me to come back again. And I focused this talk, just a couple of weeks ago, I focused this talk on what you were mentioning earlier, Dennis, the incredible research we have on the brain and neuroscience and how important it is to keep your brain active along with your body. So I did a whole talk on how to decrease stress and increase well-being in the later years of life. And the folks down there, they really soaked it up. And part of it is keeping your brain active and your body active. So as you're moving from living at home into a CCRC, perhaps, the most important things are social connection. You don't want to just be sitting in your apartment. I know at my dad's place, they have these floor events. I know you don't feel like going, go. Social connection doesn't have to be close, tight relationships. It's good to have one or two of those if you can, but social connection is walking down the hall to get your mail and saying, hey, neighbor, how you doing? How you doing today? Yeah, it is nice weather. Just little things like that matter a tremendous amount. Number two, having a purpose. What's my purpose going to be? Now, when you go and you say, well, what's my purpose? I'm retired. I'm in the CCRC. The purpose is, what am I going to do today? My dad will say, hey, Gary, my main thing today is I'm going to clean the kitchen. That's my main purpose for the day. Or my main purpose is going to be to do whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but have that social connection, have a purpose, a plan for like what you want to do. And then three, all this research that our brains can continue to learn. Dennis and Abby, I remember when I was a young kid, we had our Aunt Edna. Everybody loved Aunt Edna because she was a character out the wazoo. And we went to visit her back at her CCRC, but those are the days, kind of the old nursing home. So she's in her late 80s. This is all the women are on one floor, all the men are on another floor. We go to her floor, she's not there. Where's Aunt Edna? We finally find out, well, she's down on the men's floor. Well, Aunt Edna, what are you doing down there? She goes, oh, I'm listening to a baseball game. I never knew anything about baseball. So these guys are teaching me all about baseball. Learning at 88. That's what you want to do. And now we know that your brain can continue to learn and make new synapses. And that's very, very important.
Well, I agree with all of that. And I'm going to add some processes to figuring out some of that stuff, because this is a question that I haven't been asked in this particular way, moving from, home to a CCRC or something like that. But what I see a lot of times, and I think is applicable, is where somebody is moving from one company to another, one role to another. And so the tool that I would offer as a way to think about this is to think about what is it that you love about the life that you have today before you move into, in your current house, and really looking broadly about what are the characteristics of what you love there? What are the things that you do? What are the healthy habits that you have? Who are the people that are important to you right here, right now in this environment? And then how much of that can you carry over? And then, and what, if you can't carry it over, what other way can you get those same needs met? So if the people, you talked about neighborhoods. So if the people in your neighborhood, in your current house, are really important to you, what are the characteristics of those people? And if there's not a way to bring them to your CCRC, then you can go out and seek neighbors or friends who bring those same characteristics and values that you enjoy. And so the idea would be that you look at today's environment and you try to recreate the stuff that you love or that really serves and feeds you well, and use it as an opportunity, since you're going into a new environment, to look at the habits that haven't been serving you. It could be a pattern of eating, or it could be, a pattern of exercise or lack thereof, or something like that, that you say, I want to change that, and build it in day one into your new environment, because then it becomes a part of your new pattern and you will be more likely to carry that forward. So I think those are a couple of tools that I would offer in terms of how to think about it. The other piece of it that I think can be emotional is to recognize that you're probably going to feel some sort of a loss. I know when people transition out of a business, there's a loss that they have to mourn. And so it's okay, and it's normal, and it's probably a good thing to acknowledge and mourn the loss of what you had in this current environment, even if you're super excited about moving to the new one. And recognize that the things that you're leaving behind had a place in your life then, but they may not have a place in your new life, or they'll be replaced with something that'll be, if you design it right, could be even better. So those are a couple of things I would offer.
Yeah, and let me just build on that, Abby, because and some of the things that Gary said as well. So some of the extensive research we did back for the book, and then just in working with a lot of people going through the various stages, go, slow go, no go of the fourth quarter of their life. One of the things that we found is that sometimes when they went to the retirement home, they lost traction with their purpose. So, again, maybe it's because there were more social activities and suddenly they're like, woo, I'm going to get involved with that. But they then later realized, oh, I've kind of lost something else. So, I think of one of our fourth quarter champions who just a couple of years ago moved into a retirement community in Durham, and she maintains a lot of her outside purpose activities, but does more things inside the retirement community than she had thought she was going to do. And she's actually extremely busy. I mean, between those two and doing things with grandkids and travel and a variety of other things, she's as busy as she's ever been. I think some of the people who don't flourish, they assume that everything they can get is inside those walls of the retirement community. And the other point about the social is, and it was actually one of the key findings in the Fourth Quarter Fumbles book, is about the ability to tend the friend's garden. And again, this is a little bit of a Mars-Venus thing where men, as they get older, their friends die, they move away, other things happen, and some don't tend to make friends as easily. And so their social network is shrinking, while perhaps their spouse with the retirement community and the outside community, their social community is expanding. And that actually, we've seen a recipe for conflict between spouses, because one spouse is like, why don't you get up and go do something? And the other one's like, I'm too old to make new friends. And so, any
Well, one of the things,
observations on that?
Gary, did you?
I was going to say, I'll just put a little scientific spin on what Dennis just said. Then Abby, here, your good practical stuff, but there's some fairly recent research that would suggest that loneliness, which I think most of us can pretty readily see, is becoming a global epidemic. Loneliness is an epidemic across the planet. And there's some research that would suggest that loneliness is a greater factor in your mortality than obesity, than some other typical medical markers, and that it's akin on your physical health. Loneliness is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day, as far as the impact it has on your health and what it can do to your mortality. And so, Dennis, you're describing those guys who kind of, our social circle shrinks. It's okay to have a small social circle, but you want to make sure you have at least one other person in there. And everybody doesn't have to be your best friend, but like I say, just going out and having the small interactions with the UPS person when they come in, or the person at the desk at your CCRC, those little communications are very important as well. So this thing around, hey, it's a good idea to go out there and, make some friends or whatever. That's not just a good idea. It's also something that's vital for your physical and longevity.
Well, and Gary, you used the word vital, which I thought was perfect for what I was going to, one of the things I wanted to add is there's a book that came out a number of years ago called Vital Friends. And it talks about 7 different kinds of friendships that the author, based on his research, considers as being vital to good health. Now, it doesn't mean you have to have 7 different people fulfilling those individual types of friendships, but you need at least 2 in order to round out everything, because no one person can fulfill all 7 different roles. And I think his argument, I can't remember, it's been a while since I read the book, but I want to say that his argument is that, you probably need at least 3 to truly fill out the roles. But if you don't even know what those roles are, then it's hard for you to go find those friends. The other comment I wanted to make was, Dennis, you talked about gender and some of those differences. And this plays out both with the transition that we're talking about between moving into a CCRC, but also the transition for owners exiting their business. And that is that there are some gender differences. I mean, I know it's a loaded topic, but the gender differences that tend to show up in those situations are that women historically have taken on many, many different roles fluidly throughout their lives. They are the ones that are, they give birth. And so there is that natural part of it. And then generally women tend to be, and of course, these are all, broad generalizations. Any situation could be very different, but they tend to be more the primary caregivers for both their children, but also for aging parents, and sometimes even broader than that. And they are more likely to be the parent that goes in and out of the workforce. That's changing over time. But if you think about the age of people going into CCRCs, or you think about the age of people that are exiting their business, they're mostly baby boomers or older. And that generation has been primarily, men have been leading the way, and women have been, working hard to try to get more opportunity and pay equity and all those kinds of things. So as a result, they've built a different set of skills, but also that comfort level with a variety of fluid roles, which means that the transition for them often feels easier than it feels to a man. And they are generally building more relationships over time, because men tend to be more focused on being, the breadwinner in the family, or the owner of the company, or CEO, or something like that. So fortunately, that is changing. And so what I think you're going to see in generations after this is that it's going to be easier for men to make more friends, to stay at home at different points in their career, raising children, to share a much higher workload of that, child raising responsibility.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's it.
The male female thing is interesting, because as guys, women are just in general, women are better at the relationship thing, and we have different needs in relationships. So for example, I was getting my hair cut one time, a place I'd never been to before. And this older guy comes walking in, and he sits down in the chair next to me, and it's regular barber's over there. And his barber says, "Gee, I haven't seen you in a long time." Yeah, I was in the hospital. I got cancer. And they probably tell me I got 6 months to live or whatever. And I'm going, wow, he's hearing this really heavy story, and then there's a silence. And then his barber goes, "Oh. Yeah, and then a stupid pool guy was over today. He doesn't know what he's doing." And then they start talking sports and all this other sort of stuff. And I go, wow, if a woman went in and told that to their hairdresser, it's a totally different conversation, but he got exactly what he needed, which was as guys, when we just go, oh, it's kind of like, hey man, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but you got this. That's kind of what we need to hear. And then, hey, I don't want to talk about all the stuff with the doctors and all of that. I want to talk about the stupid pool guy I got. I want to talk about sports and how that stupid quarterback blew the game last week. And so, yeah, we don't have to form relationships the same way, but it was important that he walked into that barbershop.
That's a funny story. And a good story to think about the kind of people that are in the CCRC, or we have a client who in Tennessee in her 80s decided to join a over 55 retirement group. So that's one of these new communities that everything's kind of built up so you can, kind of maneuver around. It's not an official CCRC. And She wanted to just be around younger people. She didn't want to be around old people. And she had lost her husband a few years before. But she made an interesting comment there. She said, yeah, if he was still alive, I'm not sure he would have thrived here. And so I sometimes wonder if we would have picked the right community if he was still alive. Whoa, what a comment that was. And so we, as recently as last week, we were advising a client on thinking about the next stage. Now she's a little younger for thinking about retirement communities at age 70, but we've had some that have bought a villa at age 68 and they're never there. They're traveling, they're doing everything else, but they have their ticket in the game. That's a little unusual, but we are seeing a little bit more of that. And so anyway, the 70-year-old, she is deathly afraid, single, divorced, deathly afraid of being alone and having health problems. And that fear was starting to drive her to think about moving into something earlier. Well, this particular woman is remarkable at many levels and probably has the athletic ability of a 60-year-old, maybe even a 50-year-old. I don't know. I mean, she teaches Zumba classes, for example. And so the conversation went to what we call the rule of three. And the rule of three, I learned from a very savvy business owner many years ago, that if you have two options, that you should always find a third option. Never be satisfied with two options. Force yourself to find a third option. And so in this case, last week, the third option turned out to be a potential retirement community at the coast. She had always wanted to be near the water. This is a little bit out of your chapter, Gary, moving to the coast. And so, she's investigating, she's doing her homework now. I mean, if she puts her deposit down on something, it could easily be 5 years before she even gets into the villa she wants to get into. She may still be a little bit early for it, but it's kind of opened up a whole new option for her to go rewire herself in a different place.
Yeah, she wants to come to Wilmington. There's one they're building here, Dennis. It's so beautiful. I kind of go, God, I wish I was 10 or 15 years older, because it looks like it's going to be such a nice place to live, but I can't quite bring myself to explore it right now. Going back to on this different styles. My dad is 93 in a CCRC. We lost mom about 5-6 years ago. And my dad is thriving like he never has before. Now, when he went into the CCRC 3 years ago, he was literally on death's door. I didn't know if he was going to make it from one day to the next. And 6 months in, he was doing so much better. And I was talking with him about it. He goes, Dad, you're doing incredibly well. And he goes, I know, why? She goes, my heart's still bad, right? All this other sort of stuff. But he was doing the things that lead to happiness and well-being. He was exercise. He does 45 minutes exercise, excuse me, before he even gets out of bed. I don't know all what he does, but exercise that a 93-year-old guy can do. He does a sit and fit class that a 93-year-old guy can do 6 times a week. He goes to the pool 4 or 5 times a week. And he's a strong introvert. So he's not out there chatting with everybody. He can't hear very well, but he goes and gets his mail and chats a little along the way. And then he uses technology. He's known as the joke guy. You get on my dad's email list, you will get a continual series of jokes from him. And that's one of the ways he maintains his social connection, is through the electronic media. And then people write him back, and he maintains his relationships that way. So there's lots of different ways to approach this.
Yeah, it sounds like he's discovered what he's passionate about at this stage of his life at age 93, what his favorite strengths are. Clearly, he's a joke teller, and what lifestyle he wants to be living, which is, I think, all any of us can ever aspire to, is being able to answer those questions and then create a life that allows us to live that.
And I want to say something here that might be helpful for people, to really keep it real. This has not been an easy transition for me, because again, it hit me suddenly, and it's taken me a while to get through it. And I want people to know that if that happens and you find yourself struggling, don't go, there's something wrong with me. You go, oh, childbirth is kind of difficult for the child and the mom. It's difficult when we make these passages, and getting birthed into a new phase of your life isn't always easy, but there's so many things we can do to help ourselves through it. So I turn to people like my good friend, Dennis, if I'm struggling. Hey, Dennis, not just on the financial side, Dennis, just going to talk with you about what's going on in my life. Luckily, my wife's my best friend. I can talk with her about stuff. So you got Abby there that can help all kinds of business professionals make these transitions. So if you find yourself struggling like I did, I don't think I'm still struggling anymore, but boy, I did there for quite a while. That's okay. And then seek out some people who can help, whether they're friends or professionals, because believe me, you're not the only one.
Well said.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe winding up some of this discussion around that important piece that you both talked about earlier, the purpose. And this is where I see some struggles where, and it can be when they're, preparing for retirement. We have some folks preparing for kind of normal age retirement. We have some preparing for early retirement. What am I going to do with my time? How am I going to feel like I'm fulfilled? Many of them are giving themselves some time to figure it out. And that probably goes back to, you don't need to figure it all out day one, but figuring out something that's going to make you feel good. And what we've seen is that sometimes the preconceived notions that people have of what that's going to be ends up not being the right thing. And if they fail at that first thing they do, maybe they go onto the board of a nonprofit, or they're teaching at a university, or they're doing something else, they fail. And we've seen some people really lose their stride with that first failure in retirement. So let's talk about that some.
Well, I think for me, that's why I think it's so important to start with intentionality, because, conventional wisdom about exiting your business and, moving into retirement, although I hate that word because I don't think it fits where people are anymore, which I could do a whole talk on that. But I think the conventional wisdom is that you take the first 6 months to kind of separate away and then go try a bunch of things. And the problem with taking 6 months to separate and then try a bunch of things is that, first of all, you lose the connection and the community that you've built. You lose that closeness over those 6 months. You also don't replace it with a new identity statement because you haven't figured out what it is yet. And so those conversations and relationships that you have not only start to dissipate, but they get awkward because they don't know how to talk to you and you don't know how to talk to them. And then if you add to that just trying some things, a lot of folks find themselves making commitments like, I think I'll teach, a college class or something like that. And now you're hooked into a ton of work for an entire semester, and it restricts other things that you can do. And you may find out, I really hate teaching, or I don't like working with that age group or something like that. And so my approach is, I really strongly recommend, whether someone works for me or they do it on their own, that they think about this stuff with intentionality on the front end, months before they're ready for an actual exit or, a formal transition. And they really think about what are those things that are going to be, most rewarding to me. And I like my buckets because I think it helps people context those things around what are you passionate about, what are your favorite strengths, and what are your lifestyle priorities, because then you can take that information and go have really, really meaningful conversations with people or organizations that might have some ideas for you that will open up doors that you never would have imagined. So for example, Dennis, I think the person you were talking about earlier that's having the time of his life and had the opportunity to, go to China and make a really big impact there. Well, part of how that came about was sitting down with people that he thought were interesting and saying, this is who I am. These are my favorite strengths. This is what I'm passionate about. Here's how I'm thinking about my lifestyle in this next chapter. What comes to mind? Do you have any ideas for me? And the person said, in fact, I have a great idea. And then he could have a conversation sort of fleshing out what that might look like. But now it's on his terms in addition to the other person's terms. And that's a way more powerful outcome than just, sort of waiting for someone to call you up and say, hey, I want you to move to China, wow. Or I want you to teach at a university, something like that. So I'm an advocate for being very intentional and proactive in the process.
And then one thing I would add to that, Dennis, going back, I wouldn't use the word failure. I always think of it, a little kid learning to walk. When they fall down, we don't go, wow, what a failure. We go, cool, they're learning to walk. Well, you're going to fall down some when you try out some new things. I had a friend of mine started off as a client. He retired early, 52, 53, and he had his ideas of what he was going to go do. And the first 3 or 4 things, they didn't work out. Well, was that a failure? No, he was kind of learning what really did matter to him and what was really important to him. And he was able to fine tune the kinds of things that he was going to try. But the point is, you got to get out there and try. Now, I live in a neighborhood where a lot of people here are right at that transition stage, early retired, recently retired. And you see 2 different kinds of people, 3 different kinds. Some people are really happy playing pickleball, playing tennis, going to parties all the time. Cool, that's what you love doing. There's other people like my wife, her whole thing was, I don't want to play pickleball. I don't want to retire. I don't want to play pickleball. Well, she's at a homeless shelter even as we speak. And then tomorrow we're going to be at the art museum where she's a docent. And she's the president-elect of Kiwanis because they help kids. She's found all these different things. Now, some of the stuff she tried early on, okay, hey, it didn't work out. I tried, she decided she was going to try the cooking club in the neighborhood. Oh, that sounds fun. I'll go to the cooking club. And she came home. She said it was a bunch of guys with grills. And that wasn't quite what I was anticipating in the cooking club. So that's okay. So everything you try is not going to work. That means you're learning what will work. Don't view it as a failure.
I like that. I've told the story before on one of our chats about my, when I was 10 years old, my original Cuban master mentor that my dad got for me. And he said, you're going to play 1,000 games. You're going to lose most of them, but you're going to enjoy it and learn from every game. And I, as a 10-year-old kid, you're like, okay, that doesn't sound like much fun. But again, I think if you can maintain that concept of, I learned something from that experience, as opposed to, oh boy, here we go. I'm in the long decline and I just don't have my mojo anymore. I think it's a frame of mind. It's an attitude as well.
Yep. That's what I was going to say in closing, is that I feel like a lot of the transitions that we've been talking about today, and we've covered quite a number of different kinds of transitions. One of the most important factors is really having that right mindset and being able to stay grounded in that mindset that, the past has been successful and it was a great learning and positive experience, and the future can be as well. I've just got to figure out what I want it to look like.
Yeah, my closing comments would be, I'm reflecting on a friend of mine here where I live, and she lost her husband suddenly, heart issue, about 1.5 years ago. And she lives just up the street from me. And we ran into her a couple of weeks ago. She had a frog in her house, so I had to hope we'll get the frog out of the house. But I got talking with her, and she had just come back from a 3-week bus tour trip out west with a bunch of other people from the neighborhood. And she goes, yeah, I planned this, shortly after my husband died. And here's the cool thing she said. She said, that was shortly after my husband died. And somebody asked me if I wanted to go on this trip. It was down the road, but did I want to sign up? She goes, I realized that if I said no, I would always be saying no. So I said yes, even though, you could tell she wasn't really excited about signing up for a trip after her husband died, but she recognized enough self-awareness that I got to keep putting myself out there. I got to keep putting myself out into the world, even when I don't feel like it, even when it's hard. And she had a really good time on the trip.
That's a great place to end this discussion. And again, thank you, Abby. Thank you, Gary, for all your tremendous perspective, both in terms of coaching others and actually dealing with going through some of the issues yourselves. So thank you much. I'm sure we're going to continue to have many conversations about this because it is preparing for the next chapter, landing on your feet, doing it right, learning from mistakes you might make. None of it's necessarily easy. So, and thank you all for being part of our program today. As usual, this has been recorded and will be available on our Stearns Financial YouTube channel shortly if you want to forward to others or listen to it again. And so on behalf of Abby and Gary, Dennis Stearns signing off. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.